joining us. I hope you're all well, despite the ongoing difficult circumstances. We're facing this serious coronavirus crisis, which has led to a great deal of unhappiness, misfortune, leading to unemployment difficulties. The virus is still here, so we all have to be vigilant and stay. But I'm delighted to be with you again, virtually or otherwise. Mr. Barnier also thanks the interpreters for making this communication possible. You're welcome. He also says we help people understand each other well. We hope so. From the start of these negotiations, our objective was to make parallel progress on all the subjects of our future relationship. There are many such subjects because we are truly ambitious when it comes to this future relationship. And as I've said at the last round, for that to be possible, we needed to get rid of 4 serious areas of blockages on fishing and open and fair competition on so-called level playing field. These are 2 elements that are absolutely essential and cannot be separated out from trade as we work towards a new economic partnership with the UK. Secondly, guarantees on fundamental rights. We need this to establish police and judicial cooperation in criminal matters that is close and tight. Third point, governance of the future partnership. This week, therefore, along with the UK delegation and David Frost, we agreed that we'd set a lot of time in our negotiating period for those 4 areas. And I'd like to thank David Frost and the 2 teams for the climate of mutual respect and the effort in the negotiations. Both sides showed great respect for each other. They did very good work in these difficult circumstances, and I'd like to pay tribute to the professionalism of all concerned. However, at the end of this week, this latest week of negotiations, I still have my responsibility under the aegis of our President, Ursula von der Leyen. I am the EU's negotiator, and my responsibility is to speak the truth. And to tell the truth, this week there have been no significant areas of progress, starting with fishing. On fisheries, the UK have not shown any true will to explore other approaches beyond zonal attachment for the sharing of quotas. They continue to condition access to waters to an annual negotiation, which is not possible for us, not even technically possible. The EU wants to construct a stable economic partnership. That's always been our desire. Next point, level playing field. Economic fair play, trade fair play. No progress there either, despite the fact that, as I said, on this week we tried to focus on certain topics, in particular on subjects in particular that we thought were closer to reaching agreement, such as things like the non-regression mechanisms when it came to social, environmental, climate-related tax and fiscal matters and sustainable development. So no progress there either. And then on governance for the future partnership, we're still a long way away from the framework we wanted, establishing legal links between our different areas of cooperation for a cross-cutting governance framework. Finally, on law enforcement, judicial cooperation and police cooperation, we were able to have a more constructive discussion on the issues of commitments arising from the European Convention of Human Rights. But there are still some important questions open as to how all that would be reflected in the agreement itself. So, ladies and gentlemen, on these points, as on other points, all we're asking for is for the political declaration to be respected and complied with. There has been no significant progress on these points, as I've said, not since the start of the negotiations. And I don't think we can go on like this forever. On top of that, the UK, as you know, have refused to extend the transition period, in other words, to allow for more time for negotiations. From our side, as indeed was already pointed out by President Ursula von der Leyen several months ago, we have always been open on our side, open to extending this period by 1 or 2 years. It's possible and written into the agreement. Our door is still open to that end. However, if there is no joint decision towards such an extension, as we understand it the case now, if there is no change, the UK will leave the single market and the customs union on the 30th of December. That's less than 7 months away from now. Now, if we take into account what we have to have in terms of time to ratify an agreement, we have to have a legal text at the latest on the 31st of October. And that leaves us about 5 months, give or take. A wee bit less, in fact. We have to use this time as efficiently as possible, therefore. Indeed, last week I'd already proposed to David Frost that we should accompany the next rounds of negotiations on all subjects through, as of the start of June, which would be the next round, as end of June, the last round. At the end of June, more concentrated, focused work on the more difficult points. I hope this will give a new boost to the 11 negotiation tables as such. And by the way, I also hope that we'll be able to start meeting face-to-face again by the end of June, which is when the next timeline is supposed to be. I think it'll work better. It'll be more effective and easier. We still have roughly 5 months, and I will continue to obviously work with my team and keeping full transparency with the 27 member states and Parliament, European Parliament as well.
To be clear, our lack of progress in this negotiation is not due to our method, but to the substance. We must stick to our commitments if we want to move forward. We engaged in this negotiation on the basis of a joint political declaration that clearly sets out the terms of our future partnership. This document is available in all languages, including English. It is not difficult to read, good weekend reading, if I may say. And this declaration was negotiated with Prime Minister Johnson himself. It was approved by the leaders of the 27 member states at the European Council in October 2019. It has the backing of the European Parliament also. It is for us, and it will remain for us, the only valid reference, the only relevant precedent in this negotiation, as it was agreed by both sides. Yet, round after round, our British counterparts seek to distance themselves from this common basis. Let me give you 4 concrete examples, referring precisely to the text of the political declaration. First, the Prime Minister Johnson agreed in paragraph 77 that, I quote, given our geographical proximity and economic interdependence, our future agreement must encompass robust commitments to prevent distortions of trade and unfair competitive advantages. This is what, together, we chose to call the level playing field. In this paragraph, the Prime Minister Boris Johnson agreed to uphold the common high standards applicable in the Union and the UK at the end of the transition period on these areas stated competition, social and employment standards, environment, climate change and relevant tax matters. We are today very far from this objective. 2. Prime Minister Johnson agreed in paragraph 66 on civil nuclear cooperation to maintain our existing high standards of nuclear safety. We are very far from this objective. 3. Prime Minister Boris Johnson agreed in paragraph 82 that our agreement should cover anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism financing. We are very far from this objective. 4. Prime Minister Johnson agreed in paragraph 118 to base our future relationship on an overarching institutional framework with links between specific areas of cooperation. And we are, once again, very far from this objective. In all areas, the UK continues to backtrack on the commitments it has undertaken in the political declaration, including on fisheries, where we committed to use our best endeavours to conclude and ratify a new agreement by the 1st of July 2020. It seems clear that we will not reach the target, considering how the negotiations in this area are going for the moment. Even, ladies and gentlemen, in the rare areas where we saw some movement this week, such as the European Convention on Human Rights, we still fall short of what we had agreed in the political declaration. And finally, as a reminder, the UK, since the beginning, does not want to talk about our cooperation on foreign policy, development and defence at all, even though we agreed this with Boris Johnson in the political declaration. And to tell the truth on these points, defence and foreign policy, also as a former foreign affairs minister in my own country, I still don't understand why. We cannot and we will not accept this backtracking on the political declaration. And at the same time, we will request the full respect of the withdrawal agreement. On citizen rights, we continue to be extremely vigilant. There have been frequent exchanges of information between Vice President Maroš Šefčovič and the Minister Michael Gove on this topic. Regarding EU citizens residing in the UK, we are pleased to hear that 3.1 million EU citizens have already been granted residence status, and we are carefully monitoring the situation of more vulnerable citizens that have difficulties applying digitally. It is also important that EU citizens residing in the UK have access to social benefits in these difficult times. As for UK nationals residing in the Union, in the 13 member states that, like the UK, have chosen a constitutive system, we are working to ensure that procedures for applying for residence status are simple, easily accessible, and clearly communicated. In the other 14 member states that have chosen a declaratory system, UK nationals will receive a physical document enabling them to prove their status. We also continue to be extremely vigilant with regard to the correct implementation of the protocol on Ireland and Northern Ireland. The UK command paper published on the 20th of May is useful, but there are still a lot of details to be settled if we want to move from aspiration to operation in line with the legal treaty. Furthermore, some of the objectives set out in this common paper, such as avoiding exit declarations on goods moving from Northern Ireland to Great Britain, are incompatible with the legal commitments accepted by the UK in the protocol. So we really need to work more on the technical details. Only a precise and rigorous implementation of the withdrawal agreement can create the confidence we need to build our future partnership. The 27 member states and the European Parliament has been very clear about this, including in our negotiating mandate. Voilà, mesdames et messieurs.
So, ladies and gentlemen, in the coming days, I will have an opportunity. The Commission will be able to take stock with President Charles Michel, with the 27 member states, with the President of the European Parliament and the European Parliament's coordination group led by David McAllister. During the month of June, we will have a second meeting of the Joint Committee on the Withdrawal Agreement and its implementation, which will take place on the 12th of June. And then we will have the high-level meeting, which we agreed to, no surprise, in the political declaration, which I mentioned several times. And this high-level meeting will take stock of the status of negotiations. We will need to set the precise date and the practical modalities, as we will have to do too for the dates and the modalities of the next round, probably as of the end of June or beginning of July. So as you can see, in a short time frame, we are moving towards the moment of truth. We expect the United Kingdom to respect its commitments under the already ratified withdrawal agreement and to respect the precise details of this political declaration, which will remain the basis of our negotiations. If that is indeed the case, and if we can ensure and maintain the mutual respect we have shown to now, if we can remain serene in our approach, and we always have been serene and patient on the EU side, adopting a calm but vigilant and determined approach, and we intend to remain like that. If we can maintain this approach, I believe that in the course of the summer, at the very beginning of the autumn, we will be able to find some common ground between the EU and the UK, and that we will be able to find an agreement for our future.
On va passer maintenant aux questions.
We'll take questions.
Nick, you have the floor. Nick, press speak. Thank you.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying. I'm just trying the camera. Brilliant. There we go. Thanks very much, Dan. Hello, Mr. Barnier. I actually... Oh, can you hear me? Yeah, brilliant. I actually had a question about something you didn't mention in your remarks, Mr. Barnier, which is state aid. This came up in David Frost's letter to you quite prominently, and it's clear that it's quite a big blockage in the level playing field side of the talks, and that the UK, are simply not going to accept the EU's state aid demands as they are. David Frost called them egregious. In your reply to him, you said on the level playing field, and you listed state aid, that it didn't mean the UK would be bound by EU law after the end of the transition. But your own mandate says that the envisaged partnership with the UK should ensure the application of EU state aid rules. So is this an area that you're prepared to compromise on? And can you do so without the member states changing your mandate? Thank you.
Non, je n'ai pas besoin qu'on me rappelle mon mandat.
I don't need to be reminded of my mandate. I know it well. And I don't need to be asked to remember what's in the political declaration on this subject. As I myself just mentioned it, and state aids more specifically just now in the agreement, in the declaration is a point that's clearly mentioned. It's, I think, the very first in that particular list, where it says that it's an area where, with the UK, we need to find a way to avoid an unfair competitive advantage. That's what it says in English. Call spade a spade. Avoid dumping in all areas, in this one in particular. That's my mandate. The aim of this is to find good mechanisms, robust commitments, to go into the English text again, to avoid such distortions of competition and to keep rules of the game that are fair and competition rules that are fair. So I can confirm that it is a very difficult point, and indeed we have a very firm position here in terms of the spirit of the political declaration, and this needs to be taken forward. Now, in this round, as I said before, we tried to go on a focus for other things, like the non-regression clauses and so forth. I explained why. I said we were disappointed we hadn't made progress on it either, but this topic of state aid is still very much an issue at the top of the level playing field discussion, but we did discuss it this time. But clearly we need those robust rules, a toolbox that works. And as I said when I wrote to David Frost recently, this has to be in line with the sovereign rules on both sides when it comes to our legal orders, our respective legal orders. Our respective sovereignties must be respected. The UK's, obviously, that's why Brexit is there. We accept that, but also ours, and the UK must accept ours. And we have to find some sort of equivalence on each side when it comes to a level and type of regulation. There's a real risk of dumping. This is one area where there is a risk, but there are other subjects as well where the same sort of exercise needs to be found. It's not just ideology or technocratic dogma. This level playing field, this fair play, economic and trade-related fair play notion actually covers hundreds of thousands of jobs that are at stake. And that's why EU member states are very firm on these matters. I'm not going to go into the detail of discussions. I'm not going to speculate where we'll end up. But if this point I'm trying to make can be properly understood, and if Boris Johnson's commitment, as he wrote them into our joint take, are respected, we will be able to agree on those robust rules that the declaration refers to and on this toolbox which we're looking for.
Now to Bruno Waterfield. Bruno. You need to activate your mic, Bruno. Just press speak once more.
Got me? Hello?
Yeah, we can hear you now, Bruno.
Okay, thank you very much. Sorry about that. Mr. Barnier, I do want to press you on something. Your mandate says on state aid that state aid, EU law, union law on state aid must be applied within the UK. The law, EU law, must be applied. That seems to go beyond a robust mechanism in the political declaration. In your letter that you wrote in reply to David Frost, you said the UK would not be bound by union law on the level playing field for the free trade agreement. Can you just clarify whether you are still supporting the idea in your mandate that on state aid, union law must apply on UK territory? Thank you.
Yes. You don't need to worry about putting pressure on me. Don't be surprised if I'm not unduly impressed at the question or concerned at the question. I know my mandate, my terms of reference, which is subject to interpretation on the British side about respect for British sovereignty, as is my role in terms of trying to achieve common progress. I've taken account of that British concern And I would suggest about their sovereignty, I would suggest to the British side that they also need to take due account of our concern about our sovereignty, which is non-negotiable in all aspects of the internal market. So I've certainly taken account of this British concern, which I can understand in political terms, and it is in this spirit and in compliance with my mandate that I wrote this letter. So I think on this basis and in the spirit of the letter you mentioned, I think we can achieve these robust commitments that the Prime Minister referred to avoid any unfair competition in the field of state aids, which is of key importance when it comes to free and fair trade. So, as I say, I'm interested in your question, but not unduly concerned at this principle. We are part of a negotiating process, and we're not going to do this in public. We need to work together in order to come up with the appropriate toolbox, the robust commitments. What we care about is how effective these mechanisms will be so that they can ensure long-term, fair, sustainable competition between the EU and the UK, but we haven't got there yet.
To Naomi O'Leary.
Hello, thank you very much for taking my question. Mr. Barnier, I wanted to ask you, in our newspaper, Newton Emerson has written a piece in which he describes the EU's approach to Northern Ireland as dangerously cynical, saying that an insistence on a maximalist approach in terms of checks on the sea border is using Northern Ireland as a bargaining chip, and that indicating the EU should take a more reasonable approach. How do you respond to that?
J'ai lu cet article de Newton Emerson.
I read the article you referred to, Newton Emerson's article. In another newspaper, I read something else, a very useful document, a very interesting document, I should say. It was from the Northern Irish Business Brexit Working Group, people I'm well familiar with, and my team works closely with this body. I've met them before, so I read that too. And I read Newton Emerson's article with interest. This is, after all, someone who's very respected and someone whose opinion is worth taking note of. Now, in this case, I'd just like to take a minute to say a wee bit more about what's in this protocol, what this agreement contains, this Irish and Northern Ireland protocol. We worked day and night for 3 years to find solutions in this area. We're dealing with a complex, serious situation, not one we created. It's created by the fact of Brexit and by the fact that, being part of the United Kingdom, the north of Ireland, Northern Ireland, will leave the EU and later the customs union and the single market. For 3 years, with the previous negotiation team, in the withdrawal agreement negotiations, and since then we've been working to find solutions to this complex solution, as I've said, on both sides of the border. We sought and we found ways of dealing with many problems at the same time. That's what makes for the complexity on both sides of the border. The Good Friday-Belfast agreement has to be preserved. That's what we have to do, which means no land border. It's a condition for peace. It's our priority for all people to preserve that. The second point is North-South cooperation. Thirdly is the internal market's own integrity. But that's not just a technical matter. It shouldn't be. We're talking about protecting consumers, protecting businesses, protecting the EU budget, as we do wherever there's an external border around the single market. The consumers have to be able to stay safe, get safe food, use safe products. That's what we have to ensure. At the same time, there's democratic legitimacy, which also enters into play through the Northern Irish Assembly's elected members being able to play their part. Now, an agreement was found. It's complex, but it's sustainable, it's durable, unlike the backstop as was originally mooted under Theresa May's government. With the UK, we've subsequently, together with the UK, it's not against the UK, it's with the UK, with Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, that this protocol was signed, which the Parliament ratified and which the House of Commons ratified. Now it's about implementing it in an objective, rigorous, pragmatic way. In a disciplined way too, given the timelines. It has to be fully operational across the board at the end of this year. And we have to be able to verify that is the case. We can't verify it right at the end of the year. We have to do that before, because some of the things need to be done take time. Infrastructure may take time. Human resources need to be provided. That takes time. We can't do it at the last minute. Furthermore, as we analyse these things, some of these checks are already being carried out at the port, at the airport in Belfast for some products and animals coming in from elsewhere, from the rest of the United Kingdom. Regarding Ms Emerson's concerns, and indeed what the Northern Irish Business Working Group said, I would say that we can take into account those concerns within the framework of the protocol as is currently written, because it's written in very precise ways. There are many options we can use. In the customs code of the Union, for instance, simplified declarations can be used for large economic operators, supermarkets being one of them, since Mr Emerson actually name-checked those. They can absolutely use that kind of facilitation in a pragmatic way. And finally, there are some technical things that still need to be done that are ongoing in terms of work on tariff exemptions for goods which do not risk to enter in the internal market. This is something we're discussing with the UK as I speak. The Joint Committee will obviously discuss this further, but we're talking about exemptions for things that come into Northern Ireland from the UK or elsewhere, which clearly are only going to be used in Northern Ireland and aren't at any risk of coming into the EU single market. Because if something comes into the single market, then we have to be able to protect our citizens and guarantee that European rules are being complied with. And of course, we're ready to work with the UK further on all aspects which the EU Customs Code can offer in order to facilitate trade and do everything we can to that end. But for that, we need genuine commitment also from the UK side on a number of technical issues, which I have to say currently isn't always forthcoming. We've worked very hard, we've been very patient. I've personally been involved in much of this and followed this very closely, and we found a delicate balance. I know it's a complex matter. I know everything has to be applied in a pragmatic, rigorous and objective way, but I am a pragmatic person. But you know what the alternative is if we fail? We would have a hard border on the island of Ireland. We don't want that, because together we want to keep peace. I think everyone agrees that it is in no one's interest, any citizen on either side of the border, for us to fail. So that's our approach. I'm not dogmatic. Sometimes there's a bit of spin amongst UK politicians saying that I'm some kind of dogmatic person and representing a technocratic commission. But I'm a pragmatic man. I'm also a politician. I've been to Dungannon. I've spoken to all the stakeholders, citizens, community groups. I went to speak, to listen, to understand, and then try to act in a proper way. And I did so as a politician that listens to people, and we'll be pragmatic, but we have to keep peace and stability in Ireland, keep the all-Ireland economy going, offer guarantees that all 27 member states and all our citizens and consumers are in right to expect, all businesses are in right to expect, which has to do with how goods enter the internal market and how conditions are preserved within that market. I'm sure that if we don't get bogged down in our ideological debates with pragmatism, we can pull this off.
Grimm. Oliver? You need to press speak, Oliver.
Vous m'écoutez maintenant?
Oui.
Ça va maintenant? Ça marche?
I hope you can hear me. Oliver Graham, Austrian newspaper. You mentioned the lack of interest on the UK side in terms of respecting the political agreement and the rules that had been agreed to. Do you think it will be necessary to have a very high-level meeting between perhaps the British Prime Minister and the President of the Commission and of the President of the European Council or the President of France or Chancellor or the Chancellor of Germany in order to recall the importance of this negotiating framework and the need to overcome this stalemate, the current stalemate? Thank you.
Mais cette réunion,
Well, thank you. This meeting, this high-level meeting is planned. It is actually provided for in the political declaration since the 17th of October last year when the declaration was signed. And following the summit, which Prime Minister Johnson attended, he said, "This is the first and probably last time I will attend the European Council as an EU member state, as a head of government." He was welcomed very warmly. The President Michel was present, and President von der Leyen, and perhaps if you have some free time this weekend, you can take the opportunity to read this document, the political declaration, which is the precedent that has been agreed by both sides. It's not a speech. It's not an outpouring of emotion. It is a political document which was appended to the withdrawal agreement when it was ratified by the House of Commons, and which has also been approved on our side by the European Parliament. So this is a commitment which sets out in all fields the form and the depth of our partnership, including in some areas where the British side don't want to negotiate now. In terms of defence and external security and foreign policy, we remain open on these issues were Britain to change its mind. In the other fields, which we are discussing, which are of interest, the United Kingdom, the economy, internal security, trade, of course, in the full sense of the term, we have made an unparalleled offer: zero tariffs, zero quotas. And that's the only possible solution in such short negotiations with other third country partners. It took 3, 4, 5 or more years with Canada, South Korea or Japan. So in such a short time frame, that's really all we can do. And we need to do it because it's in our joint interest: zero tariffs, zero quotas. But that cannot go hand in hand with a lack of any guarantees on a level playing field. That's essential. So I'm answering at some length, but yes, there is a meeting planned between the European leaders and President von der Leyen, who will be negotiating on behalf of the European Commission, and Boris Johnson, and will be an opportunity again to put this question: do you remain committed to the political declaration? As I was saying earlier in my conclusion, if the answer is yes, and the text is quite precise on that, we are talking about giving legal force to a political declaration. That's what the negotiations are all about. If the answer is yes, which we hope, then we can and will be able to reach agreement. Since we're talking about the EU's vital interests, and we're talking about access conditions for a third country to another market of 450 million people, 22 million companies, businesses, In terms of the robust guarantees we need on the level playing field, a fair and balanced agreement on fisheries, on horizontal governance of our future agreement, and in terms of respecting a number of fundamental principles on citizens' rights in terms of civil and judicial cooperation. We need these guarantees, and we will not change our position on this. These are of key importance in protecting our internal market.
One or two more very quick questions. I'll give the floor to Jennifer Rankin.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep. You've muted yourself.
Sorry. A question on fisheries. I hope you can hear me again now.
Yeah. Very good. Yeah.
Last time, Mr. Barnier, last time you appeared before us at the end of round 3, you described the EU and UK positions on fisheries as maximalist. Can you tell us what you see as an acceptable compromise, and is there no room at all for zonal attachment? Because from the UK point of view, the EU is simply refusing to negotiate on fisheries, and they say that's not very constructive. So where do you see as a possible place for a compromise on fisheries? Thank you.
There again, well, we're in negotiations, so don't. We try to be transparent because we think we ought to, and it's an attitude we cleave to. Transparent vis-à-vis the press. Transparent is absolutely necessary also for member states and the European Parliament. But I'm trying to be as transparent as I can and to say things plainly and sincerely. But I can't go into the complex details of negotiations. They're complicated enough as it is. So forgive me for that. But if we want an agreement on fisheries, and we do want an agreement on fisheries, and remember, there won't be agreement on trade if there isn't one on fisheries. There are two prerequisites for the trade agreement to hold. Balance on fisheries, and secondly, an agreement on level playing field issues. This has been clearly written down for the last 3.5 years. So nothing's new under the sun. It shouldn't surprise anyone. And we've said that very clearly and repeated it, particularly on the level playing field inter alia. And on fisheries, we have very strong positions on both sides. The EU wants the status quo. The UK want to change everything. If we want an agreement, we have to discuss somewhere in between those two positions. We're prepared to discuss what needs to be discussed. Zonal attachment is the only parameter which the UK cleaves to. If that's the case, then there's no discussion to be had. We recognise that now the UK is a third country, it has sovereignty over its own waters. It is no longer bound by the common fisheries policy, and no longer will be. But in the interest of everyone, including fisheries stakeholders, including businesses that deal with processed fisheries products on both sides of our respective border, we need a sustainable, balanced agreement. We're not going to discuss access to waters and species and quotas every year from scratch. It's technically not possible. There are hundreds of species. We have to go into detail. We have to find parameters. Zonal attachments is a parameter, but there's historic rights. Some of these go way back for fishermen on both sides. That's another parameter. There's the local communities of fishermen that have their economic interests. That's another parameter that's important. Remember, there are always people, tens of thousands of men and women behind each of these terms. There's protection of species. That's another thing I'm very concerned about. Biodiversity, natural resources. UN rules that we have to comply with when it comes to that. All these are parameters we have to implement together as long as we agree to open to all these parameters. That's what the issue is. The UK have not given me the impression that they want to enter into such a discussion. That's why I said I felt disappointed. The EU position stays. It's a strong position. The UK stays. It's with its strong position, but if we don't discuss somewhere between the two, we never get an agreement. And I do want us to get an agreement because it's one of the conditions we must achieve to get a trade agreement in more general terms. Thank you. We take one last question.
Katja?
Thank you very much. I hope you can hear me. I know we're having some problems with microphones. Thank you very much. Mr. Barnier, you said that you hope that the summit between Boris Johnson, Ursula von der Leyen and Charles Michel might inject some dynamism. Is this because you think that there has been no progress so far because you need politicians to intervene in order to find compromise between the two sides? And is it your feeling, you said you are a politician, not a technocrat, that actually we're going towards a sort of a déjà vu scenario like we had last autumn, another autumn of fraught negotiations where things will be done very much at the last minute? And is it possible to do this last minute? Thank you very much.
Katja, an agreement of this type, and such an important agreement, is always agreed at the last minute. If there is agreement, there are always some adjustments that have to be made. There are issues of timing. It's basically looking for a tunnel, which we've done on a number of previous agreements. Perhaps at the end of the negotiations in October, we will no doubt need a very intensive round in order to get to the crossing, to the finishing line. But we're not there yet. I am the European negotiator, and as a politician, we have a very competent team of negotiators on the other side with the confidence of the British Prime Minister. So, of course, we have a lot of technical issues to be ironed out. The work we've been doing over the last 4 months has been useful in terms of explaining, clarifying, confronting points of view, reaching convergence, and that will be the basis of the future agreement. But I think in terms of the continuing divergences on the fundamental points I've already mentioned, we're really going to need the coming 3 or 4 months. Even if we work more intensively in July, August and September, we're going to go right up to the line in October to find an agreement. These negotiations will now no doubt need some extra political momentum. I've asked and hoped for that the British side will be given full leeway to negotiate on their side. On our side, the conditions for access to our market are very clear. That's a political point. My terms of reference, which I fully respect, were set for me by the 27 heads of state and government of the member states, and has been followed up very closely as well, supervised by the European Parliament. We're not talking about technocracy here, we're talking about politics. I'm not a technocrat or a bureaucrat. We're politicians, and we need all the experts, the expert opinion, to provide technical and expert insight. We're talking about finding stable political commitments which are set out in this political declaration. It does what it says on the tin. It is a political declaration which was agreed by Boris Johnson and the 27 heads of state and government of the European Union, supported by the European Parliament. So that is what we are hoping for at the high-level meeting in June. The precise modalities haven't yet been set. The purposes, the goals of this document need to be confirmed by Boris Johnson. It's a commitment he entered into, and by the 27 EU leaders as well. This is the framework we're working with in the European Commission.
Concludes our press conference today. Apologies for those who still have their hands up, and that's all the time that we have. We will switch over to our technical briefing in the next couple of minutes. Have a very lovely weekend. Thank you very much.